Hi all, we'll give it a couple minutes and then we'll get started, but can we just request that everyone mutes their microphone and turns the video camera function off just to assist with the connectivity.
Okay, turn it off. Yeah. Off.
Thanks, Jeff.
Got to turn it off and Edward.
And I'm on mute. Is that what you want?
No, you're off
No.
mute now.
Mute is when you can't hear, unmute is when you can hear. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Mute, you can't hear. Yeah, well, no. I'll turn the cameras off. I'm not dubbed in. It's more of a presentation. You can tell us.
Phil, we can still hear you. It might be worth putting on mute.
Sorry, mate.
Thanks. All right, everyone. I think we'll make a start now. Anyone who joins the meeting from now will be able to pick up as we go through, and as Will has mentioned in the chat function, we'll be recording the meeting, so we'll be sharing the link through for people to catch up as well. Good evening, all. My name's Darren Anderson. I'm the competitions manager at Qriket Victoria. I've only been in this role for the past couple of months following the CV restructure, having formerly been the operations manager at Qriket Southern Bayside. We'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for your time to dial in tonight. We'll attempt to keep things on time, as I'm sure many of you are yet to have dinner. I'd like to introduce the team from CV helping us tonight. Will Rice is the competition support officer and he'll be driving with the technology. Paul Milo is head of member services and he'll be providing information and answering questions throughout the night. We also have a number of other CV field and office staff online as well. COVID's made us reflect on the way we do things, and CV is no different. We've decided to present these topics as webinars as they give us an opportunity to reach a greater audience than when we meet face to face, and obviously we won't be able to do that for a while. In terms of returning to play in a COVID environment, whilst we have done a lot of work in this space over the recent months and gained insights from various authorities, we're no experts. We do, however, plan to share our thoughts, and hopefully some of the aspects raised will help you with your own planning when it comes to returning to play cricket at some stage in the near future. We will soon be hosting a series of club-focused webinars on returning to train, but tonight we're focusing on the aspects that associations have already decided to think about, no doubt, and will do soon. So this is a conversation and we need your engagement. It is about drawing from your knowledge and experience and sharing best ideas and thoughts. We already know you will be doing a lot of these things that we mentioned tonight, but if a couple of things that come out of tonight ignite a conversation at your association, then it will be deemed a worthwhile opportunity. The goal of these seminars is to ensure that you have networks and resources to support your clubs. Whilst we're meeting online today and across various locations, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands from which we're all joining and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'll throw over now to Will to run through some housekeeping.
Yeah, can you hear me now, Des?
Yep.
All good, mate. So just some general housekeeping for this evening. Anyone that joins, can we ask that they please be on mute for the main recording, and videos off as much as possible to assist those that are in weaker internet signal areas or have poor connections. You'll have a little chat function bar in the menu. It's like a little text box. if you can enter any questions and responses. There'll be a couple of questions throughout the seminar that enter through there. And just a reminder again that the meeting's being recorded for reference afterwards.
Tonight's about providing you with some updates from our end, but also to find out from you about things that you are most concerned about and what plans are already in place. We'll be going through the background and current status, 2020-21 season plans, and some recommendations that we're working through with Cricket Australia for guidelines and ideas for consideration. We'll also provide information about financing, some upcoming webinars, and resources. Obviously, since the Cricket Victoria restructure took place a few months ago, some boundaries have changed, and no doubt many of you will be across these. You can see the four main areas now being North and West Country, Southwest, East Metro, and Southeast, and the relevant staff members aligned to that. We've also had a reduction in our coach and talent specialists, and as you'll see from the slide on the screen, Tom Evans, Shane Cooper, and Guy McKenna will be filling these roles, and it shows the regions that they cross over. I'd now like to throw over to Paul, who will discuss about the additional support and servicing at head office.
Thanks, Darren. As the next slide comes up, so again, as Darren said at the start, really appreciate you giving up an hour. I appreciate you've got association meetings that you're also attending, and for many club meetings as well. And there's a lot of uncertainty out there, so we certainly appreciate you guys dialing in. As Darren said, you'll be very familiar with your regional contacts, some of which will be new, and some will be familiar over several years. But one thing that we wanted to share is also the member services team. So as it says there, it's there to service the members of cricket. So down through in the Metro case, the VMCU and the subbies, and obviously through the associations and out to clubs. So certainly our role is supporting those that are out in the field, and obviously associations and clubs, with a particular focus at our end, more so on peak bodies and associations, with the regional staffs being the club support. What we've done is we've structured our team. We're certainly not at City Power and haven't been for a while, but when we get back to City Power, I guess that sort of head office team in three distinct areas of support to community cricket. So the competition management side, historically we had the Premier Cricket team, which was focused on delivery of Premier Cricket, men's and women's. We also provided support to the women's community competition from a management, and in the past the regional Big Bash, which is paused for this year. But what we've sought to do, as you can see on the screen, is extend that to not just to run the competitions, but also to look outside of the competitions that we manage and the support that we provide outside of that. So Darren and Will taking a big lead in this space of COVID support. They're working with Cricket Australia, but also to then provide advice and guidance out in these sort of forums, and also the club forums that will run next week as well. So everything from an on-field perspective is their focus. So a lot of the focus tonight will be, it'll be a little bit about some of the rules and regulations, and but it's focusing on that on-field side. A lot will be familiar with Josh and Arvind over time, particularly in that the My Cricket space. But their focus, and again for clarity, is more of that off-field side of things. So Josh in particular has been focusing on the club development series and working with our regional staff to develop that. But safeguarding children, member protection, policy work is their key part, as well as the My Cricket suite of resources as well. So we see we've got the on-field, the off-field, and we've also got a couple of guys that focus on that sustainable participation side. And as you'll see there, the primary focus is of that team, it's not about school participation, it's about getting them from school to club in that school to club transition, as well as support for Woolworths Cricket Blast, junior formats, etc. So just wanted to share the member services team, who that is. It is a new look team as part of the restructure, but we've deliberately designed it around support out to associations and clubs throughout Victoria. So so that's a high level update on the team. What I might do now before throwing back to Darren is just to give a little bit of a high level update on the background and the status of where we're at from a COVID perspective. So going back to when it all kicked off, obviously there was work by all industries and all organisations, and sport was no different. So Sport Australia developed a series of protocols at two different streams. One was high performance and the other was community sport. We also had the ICC looking at it globally, particularly in relation to international cricket, and also Cricket Australia, who were seeking expert medical advice to work in with the advice of Sport Australia, who again in turn sought expert medical advice to provide what they sought was appropriate recommendations for sport. And Cricket Australia was similar in terms of their medical advice to provide appropriate recommendations for cricket throughout Victoria, cricket throughout Australia. We certainly took on board that expertise and that advice to develop protocols that were required by the state government. Every state was different, but certainly through the state government and SRV had a requirement for us to provide detailed information about what the return to play and return to train plans were for cricket. So every sport had to do that. Using the information we had, we provided that to the state government, who endorsed the protocols that were put in place. So that is an important thing to keep in mind, because councils will be requesting, and most councils will be actively requesting their associations and their clubs to confirm that that the local protocols are in line with the state sporting association. So they certainly have been ticked off. We then developed up the first set of plans based on the restrictions that were in place at the time. They were uploaded to the Cricket Victoria website and promoted widely through every step, and there has been a lot of changes, as we know, and for most of us living in Melbourne, we're living that lockdown at the moment. We know that has changed quite a bit. And even little changes that members of the public probably wouldn't know, but there was a time where they actually spoke about a maximum of 10 being what could constitute the ability to train, and then a maximum of 20 for games. So that was something that we needed to work through, but that then changed a week later to say that it's based on the requirements of the sport. Will, I might just get you to mute whoever's not on mute, if that's okay, so everyone can hear. I'll just hold on 2 seconds. Right, thanks, Will. So what we established was updates to those protocols as they went along. So the latest is and will remain on the Cricket Victoria homepage of the website. There's been about 5 so far. Obviously, with each lockdown change, that'll keep changing as we go. We know in Victoria the requirements are no training and no matches to be played right throughout Victoria, with some slightly different protocols in Melbourne based on the curfew and how many people can exercise in terms of the family that can go out and exercise, as opposed to just one other person that can go out and exercise. And we'll touch on what we recommend from an exercise perspective as we go as well. The other things we've been doing is obviously checking from an insurance perspective, are we covered during the COVID pandemic, and certainly Marsh has confirmed. So Marsh is the new JLT Sport. When they took over JLT, has confirmed that insurance is maintained certainly through this period. We've also asked the question, if worst case scenario, the entire season gets cancelled, what will happen with insurance? And pleasingly, the insurance refunds for a majority of those policies, but certainly the public liability and personal accident would be refunded, which is the majority of the insurance part as well. So those that are seeking to register, we know there's a little glitch in the Marsh system at the moment, but those that are seeking to get a certificate of currency for proof to be able to access their council facility for the summer, we certainly encourage that. And for those that are seeking to make that insurance payment, that knowledge that the majority of that insurance payment is refundable as well. So We promoted heavily the grant opportunities, and there was over 700 clubs that took that benefited from that $1,000 state government grant. Working each week with the state government, putting together these workshops. So there's a range of things that are happening in the background, and Darren will touch on the club workshops from next week, which will really focus on the training aspect and the club facility aspect. Tonight is more about the focus for associations, and particularly some of the things that that you will need to focus on. But that's been sort of we're certainly, as you are, both from either from a business perspective or an association perspective. We know that everyone's living and breathing this, so are we. So we're trying to keep as up to date as we can, and we're engaging with the state government as widely as we can, and getting feedback from a range of sources. But certainly interested in the chat tonight and some of the challenges or questions that you might have. Hopefully we can address some of those, or at least take some on notice to address. But that's a bit of the background as to where we're at now. So I might hand back to you, Darren, just to run through, I guess, the key slide for tonight.
No worries. Thanks, Paul. So if we want to look at the key things that we need to start bringing to the attention of associations and working through, start dates is one of the big ones. Now, technically, we can start the cricket season on October 3, given the fact that all the winter codes have now cancelled their seasons. However, obviously, with what we're going through at the moment, we also need to consider a number of other things, like the preparation time for turf wickets. So we do urge associations to keep in constant contact with their local councils around when they're looking to start their season, because many of the councils across metropolitan Melbourne have stood down their staff, as it is not considered an essential workplace item. So make sure you are contacting your councils if you are planning around start dates, just to give them a bit of a heads up so they can ensure that wickets are prepared in time. Also, providing adequate notice to players and officials before the round one, especially those that have work plans, or if they need to make up some hours, or if they're shift workers, so that way they can organise their times. And then adequate time for players to prepare for round one and avoid injury. This is especially bowlers. We're thinking perhaps three weeks notice, maybe 2 at a minimum, very minimum. However, the high performance from Cricket Victoria feedback for Premier Cricket was a little longer for kicking off with one-day cricket. That was around about 4 to 6 weeks of bat v ball in the nets to get the bowlers at first 11 standard Premier Cricket ready to commence play. So that's something that we think associations should be looking at. As you'll know, Cricket Victoria also provided a 7-step guide for Premier Cricket with the earliest start date possible, and then cancelling through that in different structure options. As we communicated at the VMCU AGM earlier this week, we'll be providing that to the VMCU and all the associations as a bit of a template that they are more than welcome to utilise and look through and use for their own associations if need be. But one of the questions that we do have for the group is, what are associations currently thinking at the moment? Maybe you could add your current planned start date for seniors and juniors into the chat function, so that way other people on the call can see what other associations are looking at doing. Matchday Protocols. This is something that we've been working pretty closely with all the other states in Cricket Australia with. And we're looking to come up with a bit of documentation to provide around. But this stuff includes the frequency of sanitisation, whether that's every 6, every 10 overs, the fall of wickets. It will no doubt add some extra time for junior matches and senior matches, which need to be brought into consideration. And it's something that we've seen take place over in the UK once they've returned to community cricket over there. The impact for umpires, not touching the ball, players' jumpers, caps, not sharing counters, all that sort of stuff. Where bowlers' caps and jumpers are being left while bowling. So no doubt you would have seen the West Indies-England test series that the bowlers were either taking their hats and jumpers over and placing them over the boundary. Some of them were giving them to teammates to wear on top of their heads. Or in the case of Jason Holder, he just didn't wear a jumper or a hat at all because he didn't want to have to be putting it anywhere else. There's going to be protocols around setting up grounds, ropes, cones, stumps, if you're lucky enough, side screens. Protocols on scorers and who can score and what needs to take place with scoring. No sharing of equipment, protective equipment, including gloves, pads, helmets. These are designed to absorb sweat. So if people are touching these, they could be impacted, even back grips with gloves on based on medical advice that we've been given. There's recommendations to avoid communal afternoon tea and lunch. So players and umpires would have to bring their own food and drink bottles or buy from a canteen and kiosk. Also, consideration may need to be given to start times for junior and senior matches, especially with regards to the oldest age group, where many of the juniors are playing Saturday morning and then also playing seniors, or perhaps if you were to bowl 5 overs from one end across all junior age levels, it'll save players having to cross paths, particularly senior coaches who are also senior players, who are coaching juniors as well. If we then look at formats, this is a year that we will never experience again, hopefully. So it's an opportunity for associations to try new things. We think one-day games will be a priority. There are a number of benefits and basically to prioritising more one-day games, especially early in the season. Preparation time for bowlers early in the season with limited pre-season. If they're only bowling a limited amount of overs in a one-day game and they're not bowling significant amounts in two-day games. To get through more games early, if we have a third wave that hits, to give more chances to have a bit of a run at finals with rounds completed. It also gives an opportunity for top order batters to face more top order bowlers and save the annual situation where a batter or bowler might not execute their key skills for over a month due to watching 1 week, then a washout week 2, or then watching week 3 and finally being able to have a hit week 4. And this would be even worse if the season is cut short. It also avoids the situation where several players may be made to isolate mid-match and that team or opposition are impacted. So what happens with the results? Another opportunity is for the potential to have an additional short T20 comp, whether that's midweek, more social focus, or on weekends. It could be 4-6 weeks plus a final for juniors and or seniors, and it can really target those who aren't really wanting to commit to a full season as yet, especially footballers and soccer players who may have missed out on the winter codes, but aren't wanting to spend the full 80 overs out in the ground. It might be a real recruitment opportunity to bring people back to the game. And then we will want to look at the role of clubs and associations, noting that the Department of Health and Human Services will ultimately decide how many players or officials need to isolate and across what dates, not the club or the association. So the importance of the clubs having better lists of close contacts and a better idea of who was there will make it a lot easier. We'll cover this sort of stuff in the upcoming webinars with examples of a potential QR code that we're working through with Cricket Australia to be able to make it easier for clubs to track with their players that are in attendance. Other questions that associations probably need to work through is what action to take if a number of players or a whole team or a whole club are forced into 14-day isolation. Is the game a draw? Yet other games can proceed. What happens if the opposition need to isolate? What about the next round? Should all impacted games be classed as a draw, or will any association seek to blame the initial club by calling games a forfeit? What happens if only 3 or 4 players in the first can't play? Does the club then need to consider not fielding their lowest team and push players up? What happens if the lowest team can't field a side? Is it a draw or a normal forfeit? Would it need proof that players have been ordered to isolate from the DHHS? Or would decisions be based on players self-isolating as close contact and awaiting test results? Our recommendation is for consistency across the board. So the question we ask associations is, would you be happy if CV was to develop a single set of protocols for everyone to adopt? Rule changes. We want associations to start thinking about and knowing the process for rule changes. Do they need to call an EGM if they plan to include any specific playing condition changes for the upcoming season and the dates needed to do that to get it going before ball 1? CV will also be focusing on the advice for how clubs can stay connected to schools and protocols for running their Woolworths Cricket Blast program safely, and that information will be provided during the club seminars coming up next week. Moving on to the financial area. Aspects that associations are no doubt addressing in giving advice to clubs. Looking for support from councils and new sponsors to cover any additional COVID equipment. And every council we're finding is different. Some councils are coming in and providing grants. Some councils are making clubs clean the rooms and clean the facilities after every single use. Other councils are coming in and doing the cleaning for the clubs. So make sure you're constantly contacting your councils to find out what their processes are so you can work with your clubs around that. Assessing cash flow and budgets, looking how you can promote sponsors more, capitalising on grants, and then consider buying or lending equipment to juniors who don't have their own for the season. Consider the impact for clubs on association fees, and then player and coach costs if the season is cancelled. A number of questions that we've got have been, will Cricket Victoria be providing signage or access to signage? As Paul mentioned, over 700 Victorian career clubs were recipients of the $1,000 from the Australian government, and these grants were designed purely for this type of thing. And it's going to the Return to Cricket, returntocricket.com.au website, where there's been packs put together at significantly discounted prices, and it's the full lot with the signage and the hygiene products, just signage, or just health and hygiene products. There's also a number of different resources and information on that website, and we'll be posting a link to a bit of a YouTube video to show what's taken place at Frankston Peninsula Career Club with regards to the signage that they've been able to access through the Return to Cricket website. Other COVID resources that you can access is the Community Cricket website for Cricket Australia. As I mentioned, the Return to Cricket website, and then Cricket Victoria's club support website to get the information that you need and you'll be seeking. We might pause there and see if there are any questions around a lot of that information that we've presented already, and any questions that people have.
And it might be worth, Darren, just going back to that that earlier slide on the 2021 seasons and some of those protocols. So Peter's just noted we have we need a single set of protocols across all associations. We had a session last night for the country associations, and there was certainly a lot of support to have that sort of consistency, particularly in relation to two-day games and what happens if there's 1, 2, or 3. One of the aspects to note in that regard, and we had an example with another sport in Victoria that we're training, there was an individual that was diagnosed with COVID. What's happened from there? It wasn't a club decision or an association. Obviously, it wasn't the state or national body for the sport. It's the Department of Health and Human Services that decides how many people need to quarantine, and that quarantine period is 14 days, even if they test positive. That's the position of the department. So. Certainly the advice from that particular sport was that the benefit that club gained was that they actually had some really rigid protocols to actually say, and at that point in time, you could train in groups of 5. So they could actually prove that there was only a group of 5 and they weren't near anyone else, and they would always be separated, and they would only train in that group for a week. So the protocols and the proof were enough for the department to say, okay, we only actually need those 4 people to isolate for the next 14 days. We don't need the entirety of the club. So the benefit of that approach allowed that club to continue. But the question becomes then, if that's 3 or 4 players it could be 5 players from the first 11. What happens from there if that's in between or in advance of day 2 of a 2-day game? How do we actually handle that game? Is it a draw? Is it a forfeit? Is it the entire round called off? They will be impacted for the next round as well. players need to come up, and it's the lowest grade team isn't fielded if they haven't got enough players. So there's obviously going to be some complexity there. Certainly the feedback we had from associations last night, and it looks like just having a quick scan of the notes says, a single set would be best. So there's not any blame at an association of coming up with a set of protocols that are harsher or otherwise, or just different to the one down the road. So certainly it seems, based on the position there of last night from the country and so far in the Metro presentation tonight, that it seems like that'd be worthwhile.
I'll just jump in there, Paul. For anyone struggling to get to the chat function, it's one of the icons at the bottom of the screen that pops up next to your camera, your microphone, and it'll be a little chat box, like a little speech box that you can click on and enter any questions. Simon Poll asked around the rules for scorers. Basically, Simon, what we're doing is working through with Cricket Australia. They've provided some brief guidelines, which we've gone back to them, asking a few questions about. But at the moment, it looks like if you're live scoring, if you were to change scorers that are doing live scoring, you'd need to wipe down and sanitize the iPad or the tablet that you're using. And their recommendation is that if there are multiple scorers, and we understand that this might be difficult in lower grades, that people need to bring their own set of pens. So that way we're avoiding the contact points as much as possible.
I'll touch on, Peter had a question there about what if the CV rules conflict with existing association rules, or do they trump association rules under the COVID caveat? Essentially, associations govern their rules. What we'll be doing is providing all the guidance to come down nationally, and similar, I guess, in a way, Peter, to helmets. In a Cricket Australia or Cricket Victoria, we can't control and we don't control association rules. They are for the associations to set, but there will be certainly recommendations from Cricket Australia. And the challenge is going to be for associations and volunteers out there. They've been either watching the Test series or they've been watching the AFL throughout the course of the season, and AFL players don't need to every 5 minutes sanitise their hands, or they might not be doing that at quarter time and half time, quarter time and three-quarter time. They're obviously living in they are genuinely living in a bubble, and they are getting COVID tests before they play, and it's obviously impossible and unrealistic to compare what's going to happen with people that are just part of the community and are allowed to go about their business within the normal restrictions of the state government. So the restrictions may seem, like they're reasonably onerous when they come down from CA, but they're absolutely designed with medical experts in mind, but also to try and prevent the spread, to try and keep cricket going. So it will be different and it will be a challenge, but we'd certainly recommend for associations to adopt the recommendations that come down, from CA to ourselves. We've certainly provided feedback that it's got to be, relevant to a country or metro under 12 comp, and we've all been involved in local clubs, and I've been a team manager and volunteer at a local junior club, and we know how it works in terms of some hardly get any parents there, and you might be struggling to get a score, and multiple people need to score or umpire and go out there on for a few overs at a time and set up the cones, and it's different people all the time, and that's going to be a really, really complex and challenging one to try and work through. But we are getting that advice, and we've provided some details to Cricket Australia, and we'd encourage associations to adopt that. So as Darren said earlier, there may be some protocols and rules that you need to adopt that are normally done at an AGM, which we know some have already been held. Some you might need an EGM set up to actually adopt some of these protocols, and we're hopeful that they'll come in quite soon, so they can go out and associations can consider them. But you may need to actually set up a time for an EGM to adopt some of those rules where there might be some changes.
Yeah, with Tim's question around face masks, we're currently still working through that with Sport and Rec Victoria, trying to get a bit of an understanding of what the requirements will be. Obviously, at the moment, they've got procedures in place that if you're running or significantly exercising, you don't need to wear a face mask. We'll come back with more information once we know what that is, but it might be that if you're on the field of play, well, you don't need to wear one, but if you're waiting to bat, you're sitting there with your face mask on. But again, once we get more information from the government, we'll then be providing that information out to the associations and the clubs.
Because that's right. Ultimately, Tim, it'll come down to the state government's directive about face masks and how that's, if it was the way that it currently is. If, for example, they said face masks are still required right through to the end of March, and it's based on if you're exercising at a reasonable level, you don't need it. As Darren said, the intention of that is if you're running and you're sort of a bit of out of breath. So, for example, umpires and scorers, obviously any other volunteers or people working in the canteen, they're not exercising, but people that are out on the ground. So if a player's sitting there waiting to bat or already out, they're just sitting there, they're not exercising. So they would likely be required to wear a face mask, but we're still guessing at the moment because we're guessing as to what the state government restrictions will be in terms of what people in the community need to do in terms of wearing face masks or not.
Yep. Paul, I'll let you handle the temperature checks and the travel because you've been working with this.
Yeah, so we've asked the question of Cricket Australia in relation to temperature checks of individuals. It's not part of the required protocols from Sport Australia and also Cricket Australia. So we've taken that aboard from a community perspective. That doesn't mean that associations don't seek to implement that. We had a recent meeting with a Premier Cricket bit of a strategy group, and their recommendation for Premier Cricket is that will be implemented for Premier Cricket. So at a high performance level, all of the state players, every time they train, they're almost in a sort of a little bit of a watered down version of what's happening at the AFL, where they're not living in a bubble, but obviously the protocols at training and at City Power Centre when they get there are pretty extreme, and obviously there's regular temperature checks and regular COVID tests for them as well. But so it's not part of the requirement from Sport Australia and Cricket Australia, so we haven't put it as part of our certainly our minimum requirements, but that doesn't mean an association can't actually set that down as a requirement for that. We can obviously provide some guidance around that if associations are looking at that. The guidance there being, a temperature of 37.5. What, for example, we're looking at it likely in Premier Cricket would be that if someone arrives to training, they're tested, they're allowed to almost sit by themselves for 15 minutes and get tested again. They might have had to walk from a station, or they might be have sat in a heated car, probably not over summer, but obviously just giving them an opportunity to sit down and make sure that temperature is right. If it's still over 37.5, they'd be turned away and sent home. But so it's not part of our current requirements, but the travelling together, again, that'll be based on what the state government protocols are about distancing, that distance requirements for individuals. It was certainly a significant one, as you'd appreciate, with the country, guys, last night, where there's a lot of carpooling that goes on. One of the small ideas that we've got there from a Premier Cricket point of view, and again, obviously associations are very, very different. Premier Cricket's spread over a large footprint, but the idea is the first, say, 5 rounds, you'd be playing against in your sort of your geographic area as an idea. So to sort of cut down the challenges of I guess multiple cars going to the same venue, but certainly so it will be based on what the government protocols are at the time, and we'll continue to monitor that. We're really conscious that especially kids might get multiple people, a parent might pick up and they'll carpool. You might meet at a home venue and then all carpool to an away venue because there's not all the parents can drive. It's just going to be a bit of an education process for parents to be aware these would be the protocols that will be set in place. So it's not an answer to that one because we'll still need to wait on the state government for their protocols down the track. Just reading one coming through now from Peter, the use of sweat and saliva to polish the ball and what is proposed guidelines for individuals who breach the rule. It's a good question, Peter. So that'll be part of the protocols that are coming out. And from what we've seen to start with, it'll ultimately be some options there, depending on whether the belief, and we appreciate that umpires aren't, there's not all paid umpires, obviously. There's, especially at junior level, they're volunteers, or there might be the batters will go out, the out batters, or the bowlers will umpire and square leg to start with, and so it's certainly going to be difficult. But the intent of that is more about whether it's intentional or not intentional, and whether or not that starts with warnings, and if there's a view of that is more serious, if that becomes options there. And this will be spelt out by Cricket Australia, so I don't need to certainly jot all these down. But the current thinking is more about warnings, and then it might be an element of a 5-run penalty, but also the ability, if they feel that the health and safety of individuals being compromised by significant sweat and saliva being put on the ball, and obviously the health complications of that, the ability of the umpire and it might be the captains in lower grades or the coaches, depending on what the association's rules might set, to actually then put a halt to the game and report that to the association. But again, associations will direct what that is, but there will be some guidance out there for associations to consider. But that's sort of the thinking. If it's sort of habit and people sort of, oh no, that's sorry, I forgot, and it doesn't seem like it's intentional. The intent is that it might be a warning, for example, as a bit of a start. And obviously, there's going to be an education piece early in the season as people get used to it. But yeah, certainly for associations to work through.
Yeah, and with the regards to the temperature gauges, with Stuart's question, we understand that they're not cheap, and if you want a good one, it might cost a little bit. But again, that is also part of the $1,000 grant that the clubs were given access to. So we don't want clubs thinking that $1,000 is a chance to go towards paying coaches or buying equipment and all that sort of thing. It was based around return to play. And so the clubs would then be able to make purchases of sanitizer, signage, whether it's temperature gauges, if that is what comes in. But as Paul said, we're working through that at the moment. It's not something that is a requirement at the moment. That's what that $1,000 for clubs is to go towards. So making sure that our clubs are aware of that, and it's not just a free $1,000 that they've received.
I'll touch the next one with Peter's question about a COVID trained person. And I guess the appreciation for associations, clubs, no doubt, is this isn't something that we've created, that we've sort of looked into, and I'm sure that's not the point of the question from Peter, but we appreciate this is going to be hard, that this is an extra role, an extra responsibility. Obviously, in the last couple of years, it's we need to have a safeguarding children officer and protocols in place, and now we're sort of adding in, someone needs to take responsibility for the COVID-19 protocols. The challenge will be is if we sort of fingers crossed and hope for the best. There will be breaches, there will be challenge, and we do have to be aware that, particularly if there are still going to be restrictions throughout summer, we've seen the sort of the figures of the amount of people that are ringing hotlines to dob in. People that are doing the wrong thing in the communities is unbelievable. It's unprecedented, the amount of people that are dobbing in others, and I guess that's to some extent that's great, because we are living in a pandemic, and people are dying regularly, and it's a tragic situation. But we have to be sort of aware that we want to do our bit to try and prevent the spread of the disease. We want to do our bit to try and make sure that cricket can play throughout the entirety of the summer. the more things that we can do, and again, we'll be touching on a lot of those ideas for clubs about, you know, how their training night looks, and you know, what that sort of looks like as well. But the idea of having someone there, the more people that can go through the COVID-19 training, and honestly, there's not a significant amount to it once it sort of gets up and running. There will be a match day guide, almost a bit of a checklist to sort of, you know, to work through and to remember, and you know, obviously to some extent, fortunately, unfortunately, normally there's not hundreds of people there watching juniors and senior matches. So, but keeping spectators at a distance, you know, is going to be an important one as well, and working through what the protocols are for scorers or for umpires, or making sure there's enough hand sanitizer there to work through the protocols. And the more that we can do to try and you know, do the right thing, you know, the better off we'll be. And if that means that maybe someone doesn't get the disease or doesn't spread the virus, then that's worth it, because it obviously would be significant. And if someone does get the virus at the club, aside from, you know, the health problems, you know, there's the possibility of the entire team or club being shut down, and the impact of that not only on that particular club, but on the association, on you know, the public's perception of whether or not local cricket should be going ahead. You know, that starts putting pressure on the state government to then make decisions about whether or not sport should be closed as well. So we want sport to be going ahead as long as we possibly can. So the more that we can do on match day, and certainly Mark's point there on juniors being with coaches, captains, senior levels, completely agree. It's about sort of being who's the most responsible person to do it. Sarah's point, team managers, absolutely. Again, at my sort of local club, you know, being a team manager, and I've sort of sought to do a bit of the off-field stuff and allow the coaches to worry about coaching. And that therefore would have been, you know, my role as a team manager to say, okay, well, I'll organise who's going to be the scorer, make sure the cones are out, make sure we've got the sanitizer there, make sure that we've, you know, talking to the spectators about keeping their distance and those sort of things. But it's one of those. It's absolutely going to be a necessary evil for this year. And again, we will be under. Cricket will be under a bit of the microscope, as there's been no sport throughout winter. People will be looking at sport if and when it resumes closely, to try and see if there's any you know, mistakes. And I certainly can confirm the state government really do want sport to get up and running. We will benefit from being a non-contact sport. Other sports, even like netball and basketball, were contact sports, and therefore there was more challenges around them starting. Obviously, for the footy codes were as well. But yeah, we're certainly confident that there'll be a desire for a range of reasons. We know the physical benefits of playing sport, but also the mental benefits of being connected to your community and your friends, and we know that a lot of people are suffering, not just because of not being able to play a winter sport, but also through businesses and isolation. And so the benefits of cricket are even more significant this year, but it's going to be very, very difficult, and we need to protect it. And to protect it is to say that we'll actually need to have some more protocols than we would like. And that is about the extra set of responsibilities on match day to deal with COVID. So it is going to be a challenge, but if we don't meet the challenge, then we won't have cricket.
Yep, I'll just jump in and answer, Simon, your question around the Woolworths blast and being 100 kids on an oval. Well, if we look back to what was allowed through level 2 with the restrictions and all that, we're working through with the government, and they had various amounts of people that were allowed out in groups. And we got to a stage where if you needed 22 players on the ground, or for instance football more on the ground to get that game up, they were happy for that to take place. However, when we start looking at 100 kids, it's something that probably never came up around Auskick and junior cricket, and it's something we'll need to continue to work with the state government on to find out what that then means when you've got such large numbers of people. And if it comes to it, it might not be that many. You need to do separate sessions similar to how we did it with training and the requirements around training. But again, we'll keep clubs and associations aware once we find out more information and what the easing of the restrictions are, which might be completely different to what we experienced earlier on in the year. Also, something that I'm probably remiss to mention earlier, but came up and was a pretty hot topic last night with the country group, is around umpires. And a few associations were concerned around, obviously, umpires are in a higher age demographic and fit right into a troublesome area with COVID, but also the handling of cash and cash payments with players all handing cash notes in and the trouble around that. So a number of associations have asked us to provide information around how Qriket Victoria go about paying umpires, and it's direct into bank accounts and then invoicing clubs. So we're more than happy to share that information to the associations if they're willing to go down that path and feel that that's the best way to protect their umpires, but also for the association itself.
I'll jump in there, Darren's question there from Peter about level 1. Will we need to be back to level 1, or can we actually start at level 2? It's a really good question. We actually, the weekly state sports associations meetings with the state government, so SRV and Vic Sport, Vic Health, etc., asked that question the other day about what the current expectations are from the state government. Obviously, it's an unknown, and they will sort of look at it on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis about what they do open up. We know that there was a greater ability for non-contact sports than contact sports. So there's a potential that non-contact training might, for example, be able to start. And then it might be about an adjustment to that to say non-contact participation can start, and then contact training, contact sports training can occur. And it won't necessarily be for the same length of time either. So we're really sort of in the hands of the state government as to their announcements that they make. We know the next sort of D-Day is September 13, but that could be brought forward. It could be extended out as well. So we're really going to be in the hands of what the state government says as to when cricket can start. Certainly our expectation is that unlike the sort of the contact sports, we think that juniors and seniors will be available to start at the same time, because it's non-contact, and the ability to keep a social distance, keep that 1.5 metres throughout the course of the game is possible, which was one of the biggest challenges for the contact sports. But
with regards to the protocols that Alistair brought up, well, the accountability and all that, it comes down to a duty of care. So the recommendations being put out there for the return to train and play have been worked through pretty closely with the state government, Cricket Australia and Qriket Victoria, to find out what are the base elements that we can get back to. We're aware that clubs are full of volunteers and most associations are as well, but these are the baseline elements where we're being given the opportunity to return to train and play. So following that will be a requirement. Otherwise, if anything was to come up, it would be looking back to make sure that we've done everything possible as per the guidelines and recommendations to ensure a safe environment for our players, officials, volunteers and everyone. So we understand that they are going to be difficult, but this is going to be a difficult season. As we've mentioned, we've never met anything like this before, and we just need to work through it, and the support that we will hopefully be able to provide associations and clubs will help with that. But there's going to be a lot of work to go in between now and the start of the season, and then ongoing. So we do have the club seminars coming up, club webinars coming up. Cricket Australia have got some which we'll mention soon, but we'll be providing ongoing support. So I know Steve and a few others have asked a question around the training and support for COVID officers. Cricket Victoria, Cricket Australia will be providing webinars, but there's also the state government and Play by the Rules. A number of different organisations are setting up training and information sessions for people to get onto and learn about what's required.
And I assume, even if so Steve's got a comment there, maybe give that comment a bit of a thumbs up if others think that running these sessions, because we could certainly run one in September, one in October, one in November. It's going to be the biggest issue and obviously the most challenging and complex issue. So certainly if others have got a view, maybe just give Steve's message a thumbs up for us to keep running these sort of ones. As we've said, we certainly need as many people to dial into the ones next week, but obviously next week there's still a lot of uncertainty as to how the season's going to look moving forward, and as more becomes known, obviously we can start to provide a little bit of factual information, but also appreciating that clubs will be a lot in part directed to by what the association rules have been set. But we're certainly not shying away from providing as much information to enable associations and clubs to make decisions about protocols for match day, and also decisions for how best to minimise their risk exposure for training as well. And we'll continue to do that. So.
With regards to the recommendation for the quantities of sanitizer per team, we'll work through that and try and provide information through once the guidelines come out, because it could vary significantly if it's a break every 6 overs compared to every 10 overs, or what it is. So once Cricket Australia finalise what they believe the guidelines are, we can give clubs a bit of a notice, and I'm sure there will be enough there to be able to purchase mid-season. But yeah, we can let people know. And then with regards to Steve's comment around $1,000 on the goes so far, we understand that. However, this is something that's impacting everyone with regards to clubs, and no doubt everyone's across that, and it's just making sure that there are those things in place. And if it means that clubs are going to need to cut down on other areas in which they're spending to ensure that people can get on the park, that might be a requirement for this year to make sure that they can play cricket. I noticed that Jeff's got his hand up. I assume he's struggling with being able to access the chat functionality. So I don't know whether we want to throw to Jeff to ask a question, if that's what it is.
So, Jeff, if you did want to ask a question, you'd need to unmute yourself and ask a question. Otherwise, we'll push ahead. But I know some were looking at it. Might have been the time where I asked people to give a thumbs up to Steve's note. It might be because it's only guests can't do that, as Stu's mentioned. So we'll certainly take it on board that this sort of session for associations is important. Let's our intent would be to run more sessions for clubs, but certainly we'll gain some feedback post the sessions next week from the attendees to I guess if they feel it was worthwhile, they'll give us feedback to, and we'll certainly ask that question: would this be worthwhile of those that are attending their club session to continue to run, say, every month? But yeah, we'll certainly be asking that question as part of the survey feedback next week. I'd assume that they will. Sarah, certainly a good question about the repurchasing. We've certainly made that point to Cricket Australia, so they need to have significant stock. They've certainly given us the thumbs up there, but obviously we don't know. No one's gone through the process. No one's had. We can't sort of rely on a full season of community footy, for example, to work out how much has been required as well. So it's a little bit tough, but they're certainly confident. But again, if it does run out, it then becomes a situation of looking at other solutions. We're also looking at backup sanitizer solutions as an option as well within Victoria, and we're looking at that as a bit of a backup solution at the moment as well. But and if season stopped, they don't want to have huge stocks left. Yep, absolutely. And that certainly is a bit of a challenge, Sarah. And we understand that that people also won't want to commit to paying for a season as well, and commit to playing if they feel that it might be cancelled. And that was a big challenge for the winter codes as well. So yeah, we certainly don't want to have stocks left over, but it's probably one of those things. I think if the entire season's cancelled and we've had a year off winter and summer, there's every chance you're going to need that stock again next year. But yeah, certainly understand the point there, Sarah.
just mindful of time, what we might do is push ahead for the rest of the presentation and just go over some previous webinars, and then if there are any questions, we can come back to them at the end. Similar to what we've done tonight, we've already run 2 of these series. So one was around the volunteer recruitment and retention, and another one was around raising revenue. And you'll be able to go in and look at the recordings and the information and resources that came out from those sessions in the Qriket Victoria website. And we'll put up a link in the chat function shortly so that you can go in and see what we've previously done. But we also have a number of sessions coming up in the next few weeks as well. So we'll kick off with the club series, which will be taking place next Wednesday and Thursday night, and we'll also run sessions on Thursday afternoon and Friday afternoon. So we will promote them out following tonight's closure. But these club sessions will be ideas for clubs, the club officer training in small groups, full separated recording of groups with the QR codes, and how to access stuff through the Qriket Australia discount shop, providing examples like tonight around Matchday Protocols, and then also a bit of financial recap on the cleaning products, sponsors, grants, player and coach contract templates, which we've been working towards and providing so that clubs might be able to utilise them and not be impacted should a season not take place, yet they've come to an agreement with a player or a coach for the season. So the next webinars to take place, as I said, next week, it's the return to train with a COVID focus for clubs. We'll then be running child safety webinars, a school to club transition with Woolworths Cricket Blast, which hopefully will have some more information from the state government about that, and then also growing cricket for girls. So they'll be on the Qriket Victoria website, and we'll also post a link where you can jump in and register for these sessions. But if there aren't any more questions tonight, thanks for taking the time to dial in. Keep reaching out to us. And if it's not to head office, it's to your regional contacts or through the VMCU, and we'll hopefully be able to provide some information back to you and support you as we get the season underway.
And yeah, just as Darren said, really appreciate it. The club sessions are on next week. Keep an eye out for those. Promote them widely to your clubs. Get feedback from those. But yeah, long story short, we're here to help. So keep the conversations going. Really appreciate you giving up your time effectively to help your clubs deal with this complex issue. So we'll leave everyone to enjoy the rest of your night and look forward to support and helping you throughout the course of the year.
Thanks all.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.